Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome to The Well, your source for the latest in the field of after school and summer learning programs. Today, we are with Rodrigo Arancibia, and he's just doing a whole bunch of great stuff in the field of expanded learning. So, what's up, Rodrigo?
What's up, Bruno? How you doing, man?
Good,
Thanks for having
man.
me on.
Thanks. So, we've had these conversations on this channel, The World of Expanded Learning, before, and where it gets interested is people come back to me and say, that's the real conversation that I want to have with my staff, or that's the real
Yeah,
conversation that I want to have in my community. But sometimes when we go to those meetings, we can't really get deep into the heart of the conversation because we're operating at surface level. So
right,
I want to talk
right.
to you beyond surface level today. So
Ooh.
we've been working on this My Brother's Keeper initiative now for a couple of years.
hmm
What's your sense of the direction of what My Brother's Keeper as an initiative means to communities in your experience or in the larger scope of the national movement of MBK?
So what, I'd like to say that, I'm doing a lot of work around that, but it's just not true. I think what I tend to do instead of working with students is I tend to work more with our staff and try to provide opportunities for our young boys and men of color who are actually working in our programs instead of like what Marcus is doing up at Sac City Unified with
Mm-hmm.
the Men's Leadership Academy, Women's Leadership Academy.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, if you have not seen that, people need to check that out because
Yeah.
it's
Dope.
it's dope, and it's a transformative experience for all those young people. And shout out to Marcus and Stacy who are doing the really really awesome stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of what I'm doing and what we're doing for the field, um, it's a trip, man. Since November 8th, I think everybody's kind of been in a different space. And you and I have had these conversations and on the Thunderdome calls and whatever, and it's scary, man. It's a scary world out there, and I think more than ever, our students need us and our communities need us to kind of step up and advocate for them, and not only teach them what how to address these things, but also be to listen to them. And
Yeah.
I think the empathy piece that after school does so well is much needed. And I think in the context of My Brother's Keeper, um, it's it's what happens every single day. You know what I mean? We it's funny again. And my experience in my context is around capacity building with staff and
Mm-hmm.
I get the sense of My Brother's Keeper from from working with you, working with my brother, working with Aaron Hidon, and just being able to push each other
Mm-hmm.
and being able to listen to each other when things aren't going well. Um, that's MBK to me. That's My Brother's Keeper because it's tough, man. It's tough. I mean, I don't know how many times I've called you, frustrated about
Mm-hmm.
either work or a
Yeah.
project that we're working on, and you know, um, you've always been there for me to help out in terms of like just listening and then providing some sort of feedback, and it's always been dope.
Yeah.
And that is to me, that's My Brother's Keeper.
Yeah.
Um,
So for me, I think what's important to say about this is that a lot of the work that we're doing in MBK, a lot of people think it's this and that or the other, but even having someone to call
yeah,
that is a trusted source, that where you feel safe, that you can confide in someone that's actually not going to be judging, or it's going to give some good feedback, or just
yeah,
even sometimes just listen. I know that you've been doing a lot of work around this concept of this third space, which is
right,
expanded
yeah,
learning. Not really school, but kind of like school, but not really
right, right,
home, but
right,
kind of
right.
like home. And so tell me your thoughts on this third space and what that means for you.
So we've been, I just recently put up a post on the website, arancibia.org.
And we'll link it
Um,
on the description below.
cool, 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 cool. So I just, I recently put up a piece that was talking about the third space, and what's important to understand about that is, so Ray Oldenburg was PhD in sociology and stuff like that. Awesome dude. Wrote a book called The Great Good Space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, The Great Good Space. And it's a distinction between understanding in society. We typically have a home life and a
Mm-hmm.
work life,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have
Yep.
these two things, and you have your different identities. You're a husband, father, whatever at home, and then you're whatever your capacity is at work, right? So those two things. What societies thrive off of and what they need is this third space to really thrive, and it could be a church, it could be a bookstore, a coffee shop, a bar, and I'm pretty liberal with the how it how we define it.
Right.
And so what's fascinating about the third space is that it gives participants the ability to create their own identity.
Mm-hmm.
So you're no longer someone's little brother, little sister. You're no longer this student. You're
Yep.
someone else. And so
Yep.
that's extremely empowering for individuals to be in that third space. And after school is that third space for students. And like I mentioned in the article or in the piece, um, you know, ask anybody who works in after school, and they'll tell you that the students who are participating in the after school program um, aren't necessarily the same kids that they see during the core day. And they whatever it is, they switch, and so
Mm-hmm.
they might be super quiet in the core day,
Mm-hmm.
and then when they get to after school, now they're outgoing and doing their own
Mm-hmm.
thing,
Mm-hmm.
or vice versa. But
Mm-hmm.
again, that's a result of us creating
Yeah.
that third space for them to thrive. And so one of the cool things, and what made me remember that was my moms and I were talking about an article that was in the Guardian, and they were documenting how a Walmart came into a rural West Virginia
Mm-hmm.
community, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
when you think of Walmart, I mean, and communities, you typically think of, this big corporation coming in, taking over everything, and then ruining, these little mom and pop shops. Well,
Yeah.
for this little small rural community in West Virginia, it was welcomed. And so, it provided jobs, it provided fresh food, healthier food, it provided all these different things. But one
Mm-hmm.
thing that when it left 10 years later, it left this giant void, not
Yeah.
only economic void, not
Yeah.
only like health void. The biggest thing that stood out to me in that article was that people lost a sense of community because they had nowhere to go. They had no third space. And to me, that was so fascinating, and the importance of it, the importance of creating a space in which people feel welcomed,
Mm-hmm.
in which they can converse, and not necessarily have to be always talking about curriculum and instruction
Mm-hmm.
or whatever the topic. They can just
Mm-hmm.
shoot the shit. And I think
Yeah.
schools need to do a better job of that. We need to provide, and as silly as it sounds, we need to provide these little, Zumba classes for some of the working families,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and so if we are really intentional of how we create these spaces for our parents and families and communities, then we'll get real honest feedback on what their needs are.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult for a parent to come up to you and say we're struggling and trying to make rent, or we need food or whatever, right? Then they're
Yeah.
not going to do that outright. But if you provide a space in which it's safe, and you listen to the latent needs, not necessarily the explicit needs, like,
Right.
you're looking a little, like maybe you need some help,
Yeah.
and it's not even. I feel even bad saying it like that, because it's not that they need help. It's just sometimes people need other individuals to listen, and that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Trusted sources and trusted spaces, right?
correct,
I
correct,
you know
correct.
I clearly remember. That's why I'm glad you're talking about this third space, because I clearly remember to going to all of these professional development opportunities where the presenter would stand up there, including me sometimes, and say to themselves, "Are there any school day people in the room? Are there any administrators in the room?" And if there were, they would change their training, or they would change their tune about how they would talk about the school day so that they wouldn't insult or hurt somebody's feelings, right?
Right.
There was a struggle between, what after school was doing great that the school day isn't, or
Right,
there's
right,
the
right,
struggle about what the school day does fantastically well that the after school place cannot compete. So this
right.
idea of third place where people can just come together because they care about young people and
Exactly.
moving them forward and just share ideas and not necessarily events or talk about people, right? It's
Right,
just about
right.
ideas. It's fantastic. So I remember last year, Rodrigo, it's been 1 year to this day where
Oh,
you
wow.
and I and your brother and others from the collaborative, we got to walk into the front door of the White House
That's right. That's
to
right.
talk
Yep.
about my brother's keeper and the work that's being done here in California. And what I clearly remember about that meeting in the green room,
In the green room. Yep.
in the green room was the staff member from the White House telling us how the lesson learned here is that there's a lot of people doing MBK work and not necessarily using the moniker. And then there's
Correct.
a lot of people that are using the moniker all the time. You know who you are,
Yeah.
and not
Not
necessarily
not doing the
doing
work.
the work. And so this idea of teach one, reach one, because they may touch 100. To
Hmm.
me,
Hmm.
it's sometimes more importantly that what we can do regionally or statewide or even nationally if we just have a trusted source and a trusted space. So,
Right.
what kind of work are you doing in Southern California to teach one, reach one that can hopefully reach 100?
So again, like what I focus on, I support after school programs in Sweetwater Union High School District, right? And so I don't typically, I'm not putting in programs in those I'm not putting curriculum into those programs to, to disseminate that. And that's, a lot like Marcus is doing. It's for me, it's a little bit more intimate. And so what I'll do is, I have a group of young leaders who I meet with frequently. And I mean, one could say mentoring, but I don't, it's for me it's I don't see myself as a mentor because it's therapeutic for me to have these conversations with maybe these uh, younger men of color to kind of say, yo, how's everything going, how's your career going, how are you, what's the next step for you, how can I help, who can we talk to about whatever you're working on, how can we, and a lot of it, for me is so my top strength, the Gallup strengths is strategic. So
Mm-hmm.
what I tend to do is think about, okay, how do we take this initiative? How do we go and get as many touches as possible?
Mm-hmm.
So working with my little cadre of fellows, we look at um, really pushing the envelope for personal development, not
Mm-hmm.
so much about, so like one thing that I've been doing recently, and it sounds silly, is, actually it's two things that have really transformed my life in the past year. And I've been sharing it with, um, the people who I work with, right? And that's meditation
Mm-hmm.
and journaling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, and it's so funny because, you start out with just a quiet mind for, 7 minutes, and you work your way up. And so now I'm at like 20 minutes of just quiet space for me to kind of just focus on my breath.
Mm-hmm.
And then journaling. And the journaling is super important because it's again, it's not so much about, um, getting everything out. It's just about, going through that process of writing.
Mm-hmm.
We all have amazing stories that we need to get out,
Mm-hmm.
and we all have a book inside of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's about just putting it down.
Yeah.
And so what's cool for me is like being able to have that conversation with another colleague who's, young male, Latino, and
Mm-hmm.
just saying, you know what, I tried this. You should try it just to see how it is and see if it benefits you.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, man, I've had a couple buddies of mine that were just kind of like, I'm taking some time out to just breathe
Yeah.
and journal. And he,
That's
it's funny
dope.
because it's, we live in an age where it's really easy for MBK to become, not even become, it could be seen as, a hyper masculine thing. And I don't think it's, and obviously it's not. I mean,
Mhm.
and so for us to teach each other about, what again Marcus is talking about with self-care, um, it's important, man. And
Yeah.
I think, I can't, my job or my family can't get the best of me if I don't take
Yeah.
care of myself.
Yeah.
And that message is also an MBK thing. Like
Yeah.
you want to have the best of you at home, you want to have the best of you at work, and in that third space, you got to take care of yourself. And so
Yeah.
that's the scope of my
Those are
what I
good
do with
tips.
MBK.
Those are good tips, man. And just in the last couple of days, I don't know if you've been catching it. There's this HBO series on the story of Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine with creating beats and NWA
No, I
and
haven't
all of
seen it.
that. Yeah, and what they were talking about, I'm on part 2 of 5. So
Nice,
it's
nice.
it's been great, right? I'm not one of those. Let's watch the whole Netflix series all
You
in
don't
one
binge
weekend,
watch?
right? Yeah. So one of the things that they said, that one of the important pieces about NWA when they came out in its time is that they essentially were field reporters of what
Yeah,
was going on
yeah.
in the street and in the community, right? And they were just reporting what they lived, right?
Hmm.
And you always talk about this idea of after school and summer learning programs as the local ethnographers
Yeah, yeah,
of
yeah,
our
yeah, yeah.
time. So tell me what you mean when you call some of us practitioners the local ethnographers of what's happening in our communities.
So an ethnographer is a term that we have adopted, and an ethnographer is basically um, someone who comes in and sees a culture and then documents it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's varying ways in how you do it and what's accepted or whatever, right? But um, again, like I'm liberal with those terms, but the idea is you as an after school practitioner are going to observe your students, observe your community, and document everything that you can, and really be,
Mm-hmm.
taking notes and listening and watching and seeing how things happen and why, like it's funny because you get this. Anybody who's worked on the campus understands that awkward sense when all the kids start moving in one direction, and you're like,
That means
okay,
something.
so something's going down. I
That
need to be
means
over
something.
there. I need
Yeah.
to be over there, right? And so, lunch supervision, you're like, there's something in the air. There's something. What is that feeling? And so you don't know that unless you experience it.
Yeah.
And so that's real. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like no one is, these armchair philosophers who are coming in and talking about pedagogy, talking about teaching practices and instruction and how it's important. That don't mean nothing if you don't understand the climate and culture of what's going
Yeah.
on in your campus. Like if kids come in hungry, how do you expect them to learn if they're hungry? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like so, it's really important for us in our field to understand that you are doing it like just like you're doing the MBK work.
Mm-hmm.
You're an ethnographer. You just don't do it intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So now it's about being intentional and creating these spaces, being intentional about observing the your students and observing the community, and really providing a service that meets those needs,
Right.
whether they say it or not.
Right.
And I think someone said yesterday we had so in the other podcast that we work on, the Educated Guest podcast, shout out to
Yeah.
Caesar.
Shout out.
um, we interviewed Jerry Dor, and he's a AP US history teacher in one of the high schools here, and he brought up this amazing point about you know me giving the best to my students and making sure that product is the best possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it rings so true to me because if we think about it in that context of the product that you provide, is it the best product that you can provide? Is it the best service you can provide?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and would you want your student or your own child? Would you want that from what you're providing? And I think that in itself is just it's
Right.
if you put it into that context, you're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Like, are we
Yeah.
doing the best we can? And
Right.
and and usually you are, or there's something that you could do better. You know what I'm saying?
So in terms of ethnography, I want to give a special shout out to Chris Emden, who wrote that phenomenal book that's making just heads turn and
Hmm.
people like just rethinking their careers
For
over.
white people who teach in the hood and the rest of y'all too.
Definitely a good shout out. I'll link that in the description below. What was your take when you went through that material, when
So
you
I
read
would,
that book?
we're very fortunate to have seen Dr. Emden before that book came out, and we saw him at Boost. Shout out to Tia Quinn for being ahead of the curve yet again,
Mm-hmm.
and the Boost leadership team. And then I was fortunate enough to see him at South by Southwest last year,
Mm-hmm.
which is in the heavily the his talk is on heavy rotation. Um, and again, like when you go through the material, it's really about meeting students where they are, and it's a beautiful thing, man. I think it's. I remember talking to him at Boost a few years back and saying, um, "Hey, man, so you got your PhD, or your doctorate? You got your doctorate. Is has life changed a little bit?" And he goes, "Absolutely. People are listening to me now." And
Mm-hmm.
it bugged me out because it was like, I mean, unfortunately, it takes for you to have those little letters behind your name for you to get some play. But he's doing it though, man. And him, shout out to Roberto Rivera doing something similar. Really talking about social emotional well-being with our students and
Yeah.
creating those spaces. But again, if you extrapolate all that information, and it's really about building relationships with students,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really like, because hip hop ed is the what, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we look at Simon Sinek's three rings, and you have the
Right.
why, the how, and the what. um, Hip hop ed is the what. But
Mm-hmm.
if you get when you extrapolate everything that goes into hip hop ed, and you find that why, it's about building relationships with students.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so again, like that's something that we try to do every single day in our programs. And I think again, we do it uh, without even knowing it. Now
Right.
it's time. The next step for us is becoming more intentional about it.
Yeah, and see, this is what I'm trying to tell our site coordinators across the state is, I get a lot of calls and they ask me, so what do I have to do to be MBK? What is it that makes it MBK? And I just simply answer to them, who did you help out yesterday? Who did you reach out to yesterday? And they say no one. We'll start there, right? I think an initiative, I think those important letters that a degree gives you, I think that a position or education, all of those things just expand the platform and the opportunity to reach more people with the same message that you had when you didn't have any of those things.
Right. Right.
I remember 20 years ago, I purchased my first home, and all I didn't have kids back then, but I bought a basketball hoop and I put it right outside of my street,
That's
and I
dope.
told all the neighborhood kids, come play with it whenever you want, right? And I never knew that I would be running after school and summer learning programs statewide, where I can provide opportunities for sports and recreations to a whole bunch of young people. But it started with those 10 kids that didn't have
Yeah.
anything to do in my street that just needed a basketball hoop from someone,
That's
right?
dope, dude. That's dope.
And so do something yesterday, and everything else just gives you the platform and the voice to be able to do it with a larger audience.
Right. And again, that's a huge in terms of just take care of yourself, take care of someone that you um that could benefit from it. And I
Yeah,
think there's a lot. That's one. What's that Lao Tzu saying? That the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step.
that's right. That's
And
right.
it's all it is one small action, man, that you got to
Yeah,
take today.
and the last thing I'll say is it's really, how do we go from this concept of doing things in a very meaningful way to do it in a very intentional way? So obviously building relationships. Who is in your network now, right? And how do you expand and grow your network to be able to talk to people that would be out of our reach in many cases, yet Rodrigo's walking through that front door at the White House like he's been there before. right?
You gassed me up a little bit, brother. You gassed me up a little
like
bit. I
like
mean,
you've been there before, and I think coming in with that confidence, knowing that we may not be an expert at everything, but I know the story of the students that I serve in
right,
my community very well, and if I
right.
can just talk about that all day, I can walk into any room and tell that story.
And that's huge. And I think one of the transitions that I'm going through right now is like, you work with principals, and there's lots of um, the principals are under a lot of stress, and,
Mm-hmm.
and, and rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very difficult job, right? And so one of the things I always talk to when I speak to principals is typically, listen, I've never been a principal. I got my admin credential and all that stuff, but I've never been on the front lines as a principal, and I don't play one on TV. But I have built cultures in schools. I have built relationships with students,
Mm-hmm.
and I would consider myself um, not even an expert, but just someone who's proficient in culture building.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my niche. That's where I can come in and say, well, okay, this is where I think are we doing these, value conversations? Is this a
Mm-hmm.
value-based organization, or are you guys just doing things transactionally? And, and,
Right.
and asking those questions. This is something I learned from you, man, is being thoughtful of asking the right question, and having people, you don't want to give people the answer, you just want them to discover the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the power of a question is so,
Yeah.
so, so important.
That's why we
But
started this channel. This channel is about being interested rather than being interesting.
interesting, I love it.
Right? That's the whole point of this channel. And I hope that people out there start their own channels and start their
Yep.
own social media campaigns, because everyone has a story to tell, but I have yet to meet a great speaker that wasn't also a great listener.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Dude,
And,
I love you. I appreciate what you do out there. What is one resource that you could share with our audience that you're using right now?
ooh, one resource, one
Because
resource.
we call you the professor for a reason. You're the one that comes up with the greatest finds, books,
You bug it.
materials.
What I'm reading right now, and it's so this the book How by Dov Seidman.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Caleb Rashad who put me on that. Freaking awesome. And so when
Mm-hmm.
you look at like Simon Sinek's three circles, the why, how, and what. The what is what we do, obviously, and the why is really personally driven, and there are lots of things to figure out that why. But how is super,
Mm-hmm.
super powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding how we do things and having organizations that are principled,
Mm-hmm.
that's huge. So
Yeah.
I'm going through that right now, and that's a transformative book. The other piece, the other book that's really been dope, is Barking Up the Wrong Tree by Eric Barker.
Mm.
And it's convention. His writing style is freaking dope. It's like you're listening. It's like you're reading an email, not even email. It's like you're reading a note from a friend.
Yeah.
It's very conversational.
Yeah.
And so Barking Up the Wrong Tree talks about common myths and ideas that we have about success and how they're absolutely wrong. And so one of the chapters is what we can learn from gang members, serial killers, and jerks. And I was like bugging out, like, what? How does this even come together? And it hit it on the head, bro. When you start talking about um, gang members and what you can actually learn from gang members, fascinating. And obviously we're not advocating for people to be in gangs, because
Solid marketing strategy. Solid
no,
marketing strategy.
but what it is, I mean, again, that community is built off of trust,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so these especially in the prison system, they are so important. That social bond of trust is
Mm-hmm.
so important. It often means life and death.
Mm-hmm.
And so, thinking about that and how we can create a space in which people trust each other,
Mm-hmm.
that's the big takeaway. So
Yeah.
it's a fascinating read, and everything's rooted in research. It's not like he's just pulling stuff out of a hat.
Right.
He's actually looking at the academic articles and stuff like that. So those are the two resources that I'm on right now. I'm using Evernote.
Evernote's dope.
Evernote more than ever, especially for the journaling, because I've been really you know, you're humans are interesting animals. We find ways to not do things when we want to do them, right? So it was journaling on paper for a while, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't want to.
But you got to be able to find it. You got
Yeah,
to be
and
able to.
I
That's
don't
where
want to.
Evernote comes.
And Evernote's dope. So you know, just creating my own little notebook of the daily journals, putting on that, using the Kindle for, you know, some quick reads,
Yeah.
and those are my
Hey man,
resources.
I appreciate your time. And last thing I want to tell our viewers that continue to ask me, hey, those people that you interview on the channel, right? Like how they get to their positions, right? They always ask me, how do they look so young, or they have some great ideas. I can't visualize myself being like that. So how do they do it? I just want to point out to you, if you're watching this, he mentioned a whole bunch of resources, a whole bunch of knowledge that he has, but what he's so humble and not ever mentioning, and if you really watch this video, is how many shout outs he gave throughout the entire interview. Everyone else who's doing dope work. And that is a sign of leadership right there, being able to pay homage to the work that has been done, being able to drive it forward, making it bigger, better, and being able to acknowledge the great work that's already happening in communities. That's a skill set that we can all learn from and aspire to. So thank you, Rodrigo, for what you do and just who you are, man.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. That means a lot, especially coming from you, dude. Because
Yeah.
I look up to everyone that in our network, man. I look up to all you guys, and just super fortunate and super grateful for having you guys in my life, and that my brother's keeper piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You guys are my brother's keeper.
Yeah, and earlier in the interview, you said, I don't consider myself a mentor to these young people, and I haven't yet met a mentor of mine who has ever told me that they were my mentor. It usually is the mentee that tells them that I look up to you as a mentor.
Yeah. I can see that.
If you go up to anybody and you tell them I'm your mentor, then you're probably not.
You're like, ooh, sorry, bro, it's not gonna work out.
Then you're probably not. So, Rodrigo, with that, I leave you. Thank you for your time, and until next time.
Appreciate that, man. Let's do this again soon.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
Peace.
Bye.
Bye.